Hello and welcome everybody. I'm delighted that so many people are joining us today for this launch of the report by the Commission on a Gender-Equal Economy. I'm delighted to say that there will be something like 450 people joining us today for this very important event. The Commission was set up by the Women's Budget Group, hugely influential over the years. This report is creating a caring economy, a call for action. And that's what we're going to get today, a really loud and noisy call for action. The report calls for the kind of radical transformative thinking that changed the economy and society in 1945. So that the post-COVID shock should lead to the same kind of post-war radicalism that created the NHS and social security. This time, the call is for a universal social care service and a universal childcare service for people of all ages. And this is what women really need, but it's not just about why women need them. It's partly because women create and staff them. The Women's Budget Group is, of course, the right advocate for this, but care in all of its forms creates a better society for all. It creates many more jobs and it has a potential to hugely raise economic productivity as well, far more than the often gigantically expensive, wasteful, physical monuments that mostly male politicians tend to spend their money on, whether it's HS2 or Hinkley Point or a fantasy bridge from Scotland to Ireland and so on. Building social infrastructure is what this report's about social capital that creates more jobs and does us all far more good. Things can and must be done differently is the message of this report. Now that the coronavirus pandemic has shone an extra bright light on the inequalities that we all knew were there already, but it has put them into much higher profile for all to see. It's very encouraging that the polling in this report shows that people are willing to pay more taxes themselves, not just for other people to pay more taxes, personally pay more taxes, so that these universal services should be available to all. And I find it very encouraging too that the Tory chair of the Commons Select Committee on Women and Equalities, Caroline Noakes, is herself calling on the government to seriously consider this groundbreaking report. And that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be seriously considering it. We're going to hear from the extremely distinguished academics and experts who've drawn it together, and they're going to explain the full import of the report to us. And we're going to start off, this is the format of today's, we're going to start off with Diane Elson, the chair of the commission, and Marion Sharples, commission project manager and author of the report, going to speak first to give an overview of the findings, and then we're going to hear from 4 of the commissioners. And then we're going to have a Q&A session, which you will be able to join. Now, when you join the Q&A session, please will you put your questions into the Q&A box rather than the chat box. But do feel free, of course, to introduce yourself in the chat box. Also, you can follow the discussion on Twitter. You can use our 2 hashtags. One is hashtag Caring Economy Now, and the other is WBG Commission. So do use those as well and get as many people as possible to be aware of today's important launch. Also, the webinar is going to be recorded, and the recording will be posted on the WBG website. So I'm now going to call on first presentation from Diane Elson and Marion Sharples to cover the content of the report itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. Marion and I are going to use a PowerPoint to try and cover in a short space of time what is quite a substantial report. So Hannah, can you put up the PowerPoint, please? I don't see the PowerPoint yet. I don't see the PowerPoint yet. Does anybody else?
Afraid not. No.
Yeah. Hannah, can you hear us?
There we go. It's there. Maybe. Or maybe that.
Yes, it's here. Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're talking about creating a caring economy, because the economy we have at the moment is not a caring economy. We've clapped for carers, but we haven't paid carers a caring wage. So really things need to change. So next slide, please. So briefly about the Commission and its working methods. There are 17 commissioners from civil society organisations, academics, business, trade unions and journalists. We commissioned a lot of expert briefing papers and submissions of evidence. This is all available on the website for the Commission, and Hannah will share the address for the website. We've adopted a 4 nations approach, which means that although we began with a meeting in London, we then went to Cardiff, to Glasgow, to Belfast and to Sheffield to meet officials, politicians, researchers and members of women's organisations, and to take into account the different approaches that we found in these 4 nations, and that's something that's informed our report. We've also taken an intersectional approach in the sense that we've recognised intersecting structures of power, not only gender, but race and class and others, shaping the lived experience of women in diverse ways. Next slide, please. So just a sample of the voices from the front line, what women told us when we went to these various places. There are more of these again in the report and on the website. So about care, royal childcare is almost non-existent. We heard in Belfast, in Wales, we heard the bus only comes twice a day. You can't take your child to childcare and then go to work. Universal credit, it's been horrific, we heard in Sheffield. And what we learned from these visits to these different places is that we needed to look beyond closing the gender gap in pay, although that's very important. We needed to look beyond that to consider the economy as a whole, the unpaid economy, as well as the paid economy, the unpaid economy, which provides so much care, but which is not equally distributed between men and women, and an economy which is very much focused on short-term financial savings and financial gains. So we quickly came to the conclusion we had to think about how we can transform this. Next slide, please. So this is the vision that we came up with, a vision which is centered in gender equality, but also in well-being, because you may close the gender pay gap, but if everybody is stressed and anxious from too much work or not enough work, that's not what we really wanted to achieve. We heard that well-being was more and more important, particularly in Scotland and Wales, and also sustainability. Transport, energy, housing, for instance, we need to transform these to end damaging greenhouse gas emissions so that if we achieve a degree of gender equality, it can be sustained into the future. So we thought the intersection of these things is what would help us create a caring economy that's based on gender equality, achievement of well-being, and sustainability. Next slide, please. So just to put that more concretely, a caring economy simultaneously achieves gender equality, sustainability, and well-being. And here's an example about investment in paid care services. This improves well-being through meeting people's care needs. It improves gender equality. Our research found that investing 1% of GDP in the care sector would create overall 2.7 times as many jobs in the economy as an equivalent investment in construction. That would be 6.3 times as many jobs for women if we invested in care, but also 1.1 times as many jobs for men. Investing in care creates a lot of jobs for men as well, more overall than construction. And this is sustainable because investing in care is 3 times less polluting per job created overall than the equivalent investment in the construction industry. So we could, through this kind of investment, achieve gender equality, sustainability, and well-being. Next slide, please. But a caring economy goes beyond investing in care services, although that is important. Throughout the economy, it prioritizes care of one another and the environment in which we live. It ensures that everybody has time to care as well as time-free care. So we make a number of recommendations on the issues of working time. But also a caring economy enables men to share provision of unpaid care equally with women, something that our polling found had a lot of support. And to create this caring economy requires action on a whole series of fronts. And Marion is now going to talk about what we've done in the report on that.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Polly, as well. It's really great to be here and to see so many people tuned in to today's event. So as Polly said, I'm Marion Sharples. I'm the project manager of the Commission and the author of the report. And so now Diane's given an overview of the process of the Commission and the vision of a caring economy. I'll briefly take you through, on a bit of a whistle-stop tour, the 8 steps to a caring economy that the Commission developed. And this really builds on the point that Diane just made at the end of her presentation about how a caring economy needs to go beyond paid care services. They're a crucial part of it, but a caring economy does cover the entirety of the economy more broadly. So could we just go to the next slide, please, Hannah? So we have the Commission developed here 8 steps to a caring economy, and I'll go through each of them in turn and give an example of a recommendation for each one. And of course, all the recommendations are in the report. So let's just go to the first slide, please, Hannah. So step 1 is re-envision what we mean by the economy. And this is about looking at what matters, what counts, taking into account unpaid work as well as paid work, time as well as money, ecological limits, well-being, and so on. And this means reimagining core economic concepts such as costs, efficiency, productivity, so that we take into consideration things beyond market value. So for example, if cutting costs drives down the quality of care provided, or if productivity gains are made at the cost of someone having a burnout or environmental degradation, those things need to be taken into account as well. Step 2 is investing in social and physical infrastructure so that public services address diverse needs on an equal basis. And this includes investing in services such as those listed on the slide there across the 4 nations, as well as making sure that government at all levels has adequate and sustainable funding to invest in these services and make them happen. And also ensuring that procurement prioritises equality, wellbeing and sustainability above lowest financial cost. So an example recommendation that we make here is to establish a free at the point of use, high quality universal care service, which is financed centrally by the public purse, is closely connected to the NHS, but is locally run in consultation with users and has a well-trained and well-paid care workforce. Next slide, please, Hannah. Step 3 then is to transform the worlds of paid and unpaid work to provide not just more jobs, but better jobs, jobs which allow women and men to share paid and unpaid work equally, which provide a secure and living income, jobs which are environmentally sustainable and free from gender stereotypes and discrimination. So one of the recommendations we make under this step is to make it easier for workers to combine paid work and caring responsibilities through, for example, introducing equal legal entitlements to paid caring leave. Step 4 is invest in a caring social security system which is based on dignity and autonomy, which helps people fulfill their capabilities, whether they're in employment or not, regardless of their migration status and over the course of their lives. And one of the recommendations we make here is to improve and extend individual non-means tested benefits wherever possible and make sure that these actually meet the additional costs of caring for children and of living with disabilities. Next slide, please, Hannah. Step 5 is transform the tax systems across the UK to make them fairer and more progressive, and also to generate more revenue to invest in social security and social and physical infrastructure, which is needed, as we've seen previously, to create a caring economy. And one of the recommendations we make here is to overhaul the taxation of wealth and income from wealth, including taxing unearned income at the same rate as earnings. Step 6 is refocus the overall fiscal and monetary policy framework on building a caring economy. And an example recommendation that we make here is not readopting the restrictive targets for government borrowing and reducing the deficit that we've seen in recent years, and instead coordinating fiscal and monetary policy to avoid austerity and instead use this to create and sustain a caring economy. Next slide, please, Hannah. And the last 2 steps here then of our framework, step 7 is to work to develop a trade system that is socially and environmentally sustainable. And an example recommendation here is making sure that all post-Brexit trade and investment agreements guarantee that there isn't any deterioration of environmental, human rights and labour standards, both in the UK and our trading partners. And step 8 is to work to transform the international economic and financial system so that it is supportive of the creation of caring economies across the world. One of the recommendations we make here is to support the establishment of a United Nations tax body with equal participation of all countries to break the deadlock in efforts to eliminate global tax evasion and avoidance. Next slide, please, Hannah. And we know also that some progress on many of these areas is already underway, both abroad and already in the UK itself. So relating to step 1, which is re-envisioning what we mean by the economy, we can look to governments which have already adopted a wellbeing approach to economic policy. Scotland, Wales, New Zealand and Iceland have formed the group of wellbeing economy governments, each of which has adopted monitoring frameworks to monitor wellbeing. Relating to step 2, which is investment in social and physical infrastructure, we can look at investment in housing, for example, looking at Goldsmith Street, which is an award-winning social housing project on the outskirts of Norwich, where the houses are ecologically designed and cleverly insulated, resulting in very low heating bills. Similarly, we can look at investment in care. And if we look at Denmark, for example, which has about 11% of its population working in care compared to just 6% in the UK, and where care workers are paid about 73% of what qualified nurses and teachers earn, compared to around 50% in the UK. Looking at an example from business, then we can look at Aviva, which has equal parental leave policy, where all new parents are entitled to up to 26 weeks of parental leave at full pay, plus another 6 months of unpaid leave. And this has meant that the average length of paternity leave taken now in Aviva is 22 weeks, compared with an average of 2 weeks before the policy was brought in. And then relating to step 4, which is about investing in a caring social security system, we can look at what's been going on in Scotland. So in 2018, the Scottish Government increased carers allowance by 13%, meaning that carers in Scotland receive about an extra £450 a year compared to carers in the rest of the UK. And this year, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Scottish Government also made an automatic additional payment to those receiving carers allowance to provide further support. Next slide, please, Hannah. And this is the last thing I'll say here. Alongside the report, the Women's Budget Group also conducted polling, which shows very strong public support for these urgent changes. And some of the key stats are on this slide here. They're also in our report and on our website. They're grouped here into 3 categories. So in the turquoise box, we can see support for an increased focus on well-being and getting a better balance in life. In the yellow box, we can see support for gender equality, particularly in encouraging men to provide more care. And this was the case among both women and men polled, with really high levels of support among men aged 18 to 44. Around 3/4 of men of that age group agreed that the government should encourage and financially support men to provide more care. And I know Duncan will speak more to this point when later on. And then in the blue box at the bottom, there's support for specific policy proposals, particularly around investment in social infrastructure and social care specifically. And I think this is really crucial to making the case for a caring economy, particularly for those who may be less convinced by the idea. So not only would it bring us all countless benefits, which we've touched on here and are in detail more in the report, but also, 1, people want to see these changes clearly. 2, it makes economic sense, as we saw earlier in Diane's slides, looking at the higher returns to investment in care. And 3, progress is already underway, which we can learn from and build on to create a caring economy which works for everyone. So now it's just up to us to make this happen. So that was a very quick tour of the report itself. I'll stop there and I'll now pass over to Zubaida and the other commissioners to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And now it's Dr. Zubaida Haque, who's a commissioner, and she's also the former deputy director of the Runnymede Trust. Zubaida.
Sorry, forgot to unmute myself. Thank you very much, Polly, and Diane and Marion for that excellent introduction and sort of for that speedy tour throughout our report, Marion. It's a very good summary. There's a lot in there, so I would really urge people to try and read as much as you can, because I think it really elucidates the juncture at which we're at in life at the moment, where we can choose, if you like, choose between what a caring economy can and should be, and what an economy should be for us. You know, should it be us working for the economy, or should it be the economy working for us. We are at that juncture in life where we can choose. Now, what I want to do in the next few minutes is really talk about, if you like, what is a caring economy and what is not a caring economy. And I thought that the best way to do this is perhaps to look at the reality of our lives at the moment. We are in the middle of a pandemic. And what's interesting, there's a lot interesting about COVID-19, but what's particularly interesting about COVID-19 is how, on the one hand, it has shown us what a caring economy is. You know, we saw this right at the beginning of COVID-19 when we were asked to prioritize vulnerable people, where we were asked to protect vulnerable people, where we were asked to protect each other. Everyone had to make a little sacrifice in order to protect each other. And that was a really important message. We haven't heard that for a long, long time about how we can protect each other. But what we saw is that we didn't have to do very much to protect each other. Now, the other thing about COVID-19 is it elucidated, if you like, the lives of historically overlooked groups of people: healthcare assistants, care workers, adult social care workers, delivery drivers, bus drivers, nurses, people historically that we have overlooked. But these are people historically who are predominantly female workers and predominantly Black and ethnic minority workers. And that leads me to the point of what the pandemic has also highlighted for us. And that is that inequalities, entrenched structural inequalities in our lives, those pre-existing inequalities that haven't been addressed, came to the fore during this pandemic. And they came to the fore in a very brutal way. And it showed us that inequalities doesn't just lead to poorer outcomes. Inequalities isn't just about a little bit of discomfort and people having a little bit of less pay. Actually, inequalities can be a matter of life and death. And we saw that in COVID-19 through the disproportionate deaths of Black and ethnic minority health workers and through the disproportionate death of Black and ethnic minority people in the community. But we also saw that through the disproportionate number of deaths of people living in deprived communities. So what COVID-19 shone a light on, what it brought to the fore, was that how poverty and ethnicity intersected, how poverty and ethnicity can make our lives really precarious, how poverty and ethnicity, and this you can see through the lives of care workers, through the lives of delivery drivers, through the lives of nurses, all of whom, as I mentioned, are predominantly women, predominantly Black and ethnic minority people, how their lives, because they're low paid, because they're not valued, because their jobs are seen somehow as less worthy, until, of course, it came to this pandemic, until, of course, we realized that they were our lifeline. Because their lives and their work has not been seen as worthy, they were put in more precarious positions. They were given less protective equipment, personal protective equipment. Black and ethnic minority people were more exposed to coronavirus because of the types of housing they lived in, the types of jobs they had, the precarious jobs, the fact that they had to use public transport more. All of these factors overexposed women and Black and ethnic minority people, but also underprotected them. We have historically not valued not only the kind of work that they do, but the importance of their lives and contributions. And I suppose this is what our report is about. It is about how do we create a caring economy? How do we prioritize care for each other like we did during COVID-19? So I suppose what I'll end is on this note. For us, a caring economy is one that doesn't only attend to the different needs and circumstances of people's lives, the lived reality of people's lives, of Black and ethnic minority people's lives, of women's lives, of disabled people's lives. You know, not only does a caring economy attend and address those needs and work around those needs, it also includes those people's. And more importantly, well, no, not more importantly, but equally importantly, it takes account of the structural inequalities which makes their lives seem as though they're less worthy and less valuable. I don't want to go over my time, But thank you very much. I urge you to read this report because I'm hoping it will change your lives and all of our lives for the better. Polly, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Zubaida. That was really useful reminder of the intersectionality of the way inequalities play one upon another. Now we're going to hear from Dr. Angela O'Hagan, a commissioner. She's a reader in equalities and public policy at Glasgow Caledonian University, and she's a member of the Scottish Women's Budget Group. Angela.
Thank you very much, Polly and colleagues. Good morning, everyone, and good morning to the hundreds of you who've signed up for today's launch. I'm really, really delighted our report has generated such a lot of interest. I'm really grateful also to the commissioners and the fabulous team that have pulled this commission together, and to the local organisations, the government officials, public officials across the UK who've given their time, their insight and knowledge to make this process so personally enriching, but whose commitment and whose knowledge have resulted in such detailed and far-reaching recommendations. One of my main reflections on the Commission, well, after my initial excitement at the name, because it's very cool to focus on a gender-equal economy. That sounds really, really good, doesn't it? It's great. But one of my personal reflections is the personal learning that I have been privileged to receive from others. And amongst that, I think particularly learning from and spending some time with women in Northern Ireland. And their tenacity and clarity and organising in the face of such a brutalising environment had a huge impact on commissioners, and reinforced our drive and commitment. But that learning also reinforced the importance of our process as a commission, to take evidence and to take perspectives from across the 4 nations of the UK. The recommendations are not set out in relation to the governments of the UK because, as you all know, we have different levers within the different territories. And that divergence is one of the strengths of our process and in the evidence and analysis of the report. And we demonstrate the possibility of doing things differently. We might not be there yet. Carers allowance in Scotland is not universal. But it points to the reality and the possibility of doing things differently, and the potential and benefits from learning across the constituent parts of the UK, and where learning and experience of change and difference from one part of the UK can be beneficial to other. Of the recommendations within the 8 steps that can most immediately be applied to in Scotland, I want to highlight the absolute priority and necessity of investment in care. The Commission evidence and recommendations not only highlight the economic returns, but also the changes in procurement that are necessary and possible. It's a major issue in the commissioning of social care and support. The opportunities of the reform of social care in Scotland, the Scottish Government response on economic recovery from the COVID-induced downturn, and the recommendations that are currently being formulated through the Social Renewal Advisory Group and other advisory groups mean that not only is the Commission on a Gender-Equal Economy a call for action and an idea whose time has come, but that the recommendations in the report have somewhere to land in the proposals for immediate action coming out of current activity across the government and across civil society in Scotland, as Scotland makes its commitment to being a well-being economy a reality. As we've heard from colleagues so far, the Commission on a Gender-Equal Economy takes aim across all policy domains, from transport and tax to fiscal measures and food security, supporting parents and supporting across social care and support. And that broad sweep underscores how gender is relevant to all aspects of public policy and economic activity. This approach also then speaks directly to the National Performance Framework for Scotland and offers specific actions to advance more equal outcomes and the realisation of rights. And the work of implementation starts now for the Scottish Government, MSPs and the Scottish Parliament, and that work also includes civil society and third sector organisations in Scotland, holding the politicians and policymakers to account and working across opportunities inside and outside government to take action on the recommendations. So for the Scottish Women's Budget Group and our sister feminist organisations and others across wellbeing, economy and human rights, colleagues, we will be pushing the recommendations and keeping a close eye over the next year on how they're being implemented and acted upon, and we hope you will be too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angela. Very good to get the Scottish perspective on this. And now we're going to hear from Duncan Fisher. He is a commissioner and he's a campaigner for child welfare and climate action, and he's based in Wales. Duncan.
Thank you very much, Polly. Yes, I've like previous speakers, it's been a tremendous privilege to be on this commission, and it's just got better and better as it's gone along in terms of how inspiring it is. You know how you start these things and you don't really know where it's going, and by the end of it you think, wow, this is amazing. One thing I'd like to make a couple of points. The first one is just to a sort of reality check. We mustn't lose sight of the fact that we're in the middle of a deep struggle and conflict politically in the UK. It's not a left-right thing, but what we present here in this report is the polar opposite of the populism and the authoritarianism and the wealthy elitism that is in the ascendant in the UK at the moment. And I, for one, am very frightened about where all this might be leading. And there's a dark background to this. But this report gives me hope because I see it as part of a bigger process where people with an interest in these kind of the caring idea are coming together around these values and becoming strong together. And I think that's our only hope. We cannot fight the forces against us without doing that. So, and this is happening right now. As we're talking today and discussing this report, so those connections are forming and the alliances for future action are actually forming as we speak. So there is hope in this. As Polly said, I live in Wales. Wellbeing is a core policy agenda in Wales. We have a law, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, which requires all public bodies to take into account well-being in everything they do. And as Marion mentioned earlier, the Welsh Government is part of an alliance of progressive governments, along with Scotland, Iceland and New Zealand, who are working to take well-being up a level. Well-being is deeply part of Welsh culture, as it is for our Celtic neighbours, and so there's a deep passion, if you like, in Wales. And it's fantastic how this report pulls together the gender and the well-being ideas into one and provides so many examples that could be done and that we can work on. So that's going to really help us in Wales to advance the conversation. When the Commission visited Glasgow, we met the Wellbeing Alliance, a citizens' Wellbeing Alliance, in Glasgow, and they spoke to us, and I was so inspired by that. It was so unexpected because I wasn't expecting this, but I was so inspired by that on returning to Wales, I set about setting up the Wellbeing Alliance Cymru in Wales. And the mantra of the Alliance is that we can only make a difference together if we join forces to oppose the destructive forces that we're facing. And I think this report will really enable us in Wales to form new alliances across sectors that are traditionally not together, for example, the gender equality sector and the climate sector. And we depend on these things happening, so it's a fantastic asset. And finally, just something about men. I'm a man, as you can see. I have worked for 20 years on promoting the caring role of men. I found it immensely difficult, a deeply frustrating experience. The polling shows around this report that both women and men want a change. Women want more time free from care, men want more time to care and more time free of relentless work. The current inequality in caring makes men miserable. That's the reality. The UK's system of parental leave is absolutely terrible. It gives the leave to mothers and leaves huge incentives for families to keep it all with her. And there is less sharing of care in the first year in the UK than there would be if there were no law at all. And this report presents a supremely simple proposal that parental leave for parents in the first year is equal. That means mothers and fathers should get exactly equal money, equal time, and equal ability to share with the other. And then it is up for them to make the choices on a level playing field. And it's not up to governments to socially engineer us all into stereotypical patterns as the current legislation does. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Duncan. That was an absolutely excellent different perspective. And I'm glad you put it into the wider political context of our difficult times. I think that helps a lot. Now we're going to hear from Lynn Carvill, who served as a commissioner, and she's chief executive of Women's Tech, and she's a member of the Northern Ireland Women's Budget Group. Lynn.
Thank you very much, Polly, and good morning to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Commission for giving me the opportunity to speak at the launch of this comprehensive, timely, and indeed radical report. And I'm going to come back to the latter adjective later when I close my speech, my presentation. So I've been asked to reflect on the work of the Commission and to say a bit about that. And I want to say at the outset that my involvement in the work of this Commission has been quite a revelation, and this is for a number of reasons. Working collaboratively and taking a four nations approach was hugely refreshing. And when the Commission began its work in April 2019, Northern Ireland had not had a devolved functioning government for over 2 years, and this void would last for 3 years. In the meantime, Commissioners were provided with the amazing opportunity to visit devolved regions, being able to devote space and time listening to politicians, government officials, NGOs, civil society organisations, women's organisations, and equality and human rights organisations, share information on their ongoing work tackling inequalities and pressing for gender equality. And it was a huge privilege to hear from workers and activists from Scotland, England, and Wales. And when the Commission visited Belfast in 2019, and Angela's already mentioned this, I was so proud of the passionate and articulate voices of the Northern Ireland women's sector and equality activists. The Four Nations approach demonstrated how we can usefully learn from each other's strategies, successes, and pitfalls. A more personal reflection relates to the general discussions, deliberations, and eventual outcome of the Commission's work. It became clear very early in the discussions that care and a caring economy would be embedded in the final recommendations. And indeed, the first sentence in the executive summary is, "A caring economy is an idea whose time has come." Initially, I questioned the heavy focus on care. It is not that I don't understand the importance of care and how care is massively gendered. Rather, I thought if we were looking at a gender-equal economy and wanted to be taken seriously, we should be looking at macroeconomics, budgetary processes, following the money. Care was too soft. Then I realised, it took me about all of maybe 20 minutes to half an hour, this is my bias, the same gendered bias that pervades society, and I was institutionalised. In the midst of the chaos created by the current health crisis, those who really matter in our society, people who are critical to our health and well-being, were suddenly thrown into the limelight. As Anne Pettifer said in a recent Women's Budget Group seminar, we quickly found out that the vastly overpaid footballers and the oligarchs were not critical to our survival. Rather, it was the shelf stackers, the refuse collectors, the myriad of health and care workers that are fundamental to driving our economy, protecting and promoting our basic health and well-being. And for that, we spent a few Thursday evenings clapping our hands and banging pots at our front doors. And so my perspective has shifted. Care in all its manifestations must be front and centre of our economy. To quote the report, a caring economy means acting together to improve well-being rather than to maximise economic growth. A caring economy also involves caring about the pay and condition of workers, acting together to end discrimination, deprivation and poverty and eliminate violence and abuse, and caring about the planet on which we live together. I said at the beginning of this that this report and its recommendations are radical. Who knew that taking care, acting with care and valuing care could be radical, but it appears that it is. In conclusion, I want to acknowledge the steady guidance of our chairperson, Professor Diane Elson, and the sterling work of the project manager and report author, Marion Sharples. I wholeheartedly recommend this report to you and to decision makers across these regions. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. I felt that what you said about your own journey to understanding why care is so crucial in so many respects to our economy is very helpful, because I think a lot of people reading this report will go on exactly that journey and come to that realization that it's not a soft nice to have, but it's absolutely economically and socially crucial. So thanks very much indeed. Now we are going to have some questions from those of you out there, attendees. I hope you will have put your questions into the question box, not the chat box. And Hannah, who you can't see, but she's going to pick them out because I can't see the questions. She's going to pick out the questions, and our panelists will answer whichever one is most relevant to their presentation. So Hannah, do you want to kick off with some questions?
Thank you, Polly. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to read the questions out in groups of 3 and attempt to group them together in terms of topic. So we've had a variety of questions so far. So the first few questions, we've had a question from Lynn asking, did the Commission take account of the fact that social care is about so much more than formal care services? For example, helping people to connect to their communities, to take part in activities, to ensure unpaid carers have a life outside of care. We've seen here the conflation of care with care homes and home care, but there is so much more involved. Another question is from Marion, who would like to know why disability and long-term chronic illness is very low down and not addressed as much as other minority groups like BAME, etc. in the report. And a third question is from Susan Milner, who asks, thank you for the report and the great presentations. I would really like to hear more about how implementation of the report's recommendations is likely to shape up in Scotland and Wales, which could help show us a way forward. For example, in working out the balance between quick wins and the bigger agenda of macroeconomic policy change.
Excellent. Who would like, perhaps Marion, as one is addressed to her. Marion, would you like to pick one or more of those questions?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Polly. I think we had questions from Lynn and a Marion, which is very funny because you've got both a Lynn and a Marion on the panel. Yeah, I will, just on that first question about care, about being more than formal care services and making sure that we don't talk just about care homes and forget about all the other elements of a care service. Absolutely, I completely agree with that question, with the point made in that question. And in the report, we do talk about, for example, respite care, support for unpaid carers, the importance of community activities to support people who have caring requirements but who aren't in a care home, for example. And I would also point you to the 2 papers on care, the 2 policy briefings which fed into that section on care, both of which go more into detail about areas of the care service which are outside of care homes themselves. I think Zubaida wants to jump in as well.
Well, I was going to say that I thought that that was brought up very well in the report. One, that social care is, and I think this is absolutely right, that it is more than formal care. And I was thinking, once again, COVID-19 has really highlighted that, because of course we're beginning to see some of the sort of mental health consequences of COVID-19, and really we're just seeing just at the tip of the iceberg at the moment. I think as winter approaches, that's going to be so much more important. And so we are going to see our care workers, our social care workers having to deal with that. And we think on an everyday level, women, Black and ethnic minority people, all sorts of groups, but predominantly women who are the care workers are dealing with that on an everyday level. What we're arguing is that that's not appreciated. It's not appreciated. All the little things they do is not only is it not unpaid, but it's not appreciated. I wanted to actually talk about the important point about recognizing the considerable challenges that disabled people face. I'd like to assure you that we do talk about people with disabilities, because we recognize that it's not a zero-sum game. It's not about disabled people versus Black and ethnic minority people versus white, and it's not a race to the bottom. What we were trying to highlight in the report, elucidate really, is that we recognize that disabled people at the moment struggle to have an autonomous, safe and dignified life. We recognize that they're much more likely to be unemployed. We recognize that because of the stereotypes, because of the stereotypes, how disabled people are perceived, that they're not encouraged or allowed to fully participate in the economy. And even in the ways that they participate are not recognized. So I want to assure you that we do cover all sorts of inequalities, including the inequalities that disabled people experience, as well as Black and ethnic minority people and women.
Thank you. Hannah, do we want to go on to next lot of questions?
Yes. So a number of people are asking questions about how we can convince the government. So Sally Young says, I agree with what Polly Toynbee said about physical infrastructure projects like High Speed 2, usually accompanied by photos of men in hard hats. Much of what is being talked about, which sounds wonderful, isn't visual and not immediate. So how can it be sold to a skeptical public and a government who is clearly not receptive? Nicola Vandergaard asks, this is such a great report and I love the recommendations. What happens next? How are you going to go about getting decision makers to listen to and implement these changes? Janet Faich asked a similar question. What do panelists think we should prioritize and what should we ask the government to do first? Following on from that, Regina Frey, from a German perspective, says that the care perspective is seldom taken seriously here because conventional economists think it is not productive. It is claimed that investing in care is not worthwhile and cannot be paid for. Billions of euros are being invested in hydrogen energy in the economic stimulus packages to combat the COVID-19 crisis. This is considered to better promote the economy. How can we convince dominating economists to rethink facts on the productiveness of the caring economy would be very helpful. Thank you so much for the session.
Thanks. Diane, perhaps as chair of the commission, if you'd like to come in, because these are very pertinent questions. You know, how do you get the political leverage? How do you make it happen? What do you prioritize? How do you steer politicians away from hard hat picture opportunities towards something far less picturesque, but far more important, like care?
The Women's Budget Group has got a fabulous communications team of very energetic people who have sent this report out to all members of Parliament. They've been in touch with a lot of members of Parliament about how to take this forward. And I know in Scotland, in Wales and Northern Ireland, there's going to be specific activities led by our commissioners, supported by the Women's Budget Group communications team on engaging with policymakers and decision makers there. I think our polling shows actually there's a lot of public support for this. The creatives among you listening might think of coming up with some visual equivalent of the hard hat. Perhaps you don't need politicians are actually quite fond of going to nurseries and being pictured with small children. So that's one. Maybe they should be equally pleased to have their pictures taken when new care facilities are opened. I do think that visual representation of this is important. So all your ideas would be very keen to hear on that. But I think we have tried to work on several levels. We've tried to address the issue of, is this feasible? Yes, it is. Can we pay for it? Yes, at the moment, we can pay for all kinds of things. The Chancellor of the Exchequer has quite rightly torn up the old rule book. But the old rule book shouldn't be brought back in a hurry. It actually makes a lot of sense to borrow now while the rates of interest are so low, not only to fund mitigation schemes, but also to fund longer term investments, and longer term investments in care, in education, in a transport system that actually meets the needs that women and low income people have rather than HS2. Green energy, a green transport system. There are lots of good investment opportunities that if you look at the returns through a broader lens that doesn't just look at financial returns in the short run, but looks at what are the returns for sustainability, what are the returns for equality, what are the returns for well-being, I think you can show that this is what we need. We need it not only to address our issues now, but to create more resilience for the future. This isn't the last crisis we're going to have in terms of health. There are going to be environmental crises too. So I think this investment in transforming our economy in many, many ways will stand us well when we're facing future crises, as well as help us to recover from this crisis.
Thank you very much. We got some more, Hannah.
Oh, I think Duncan wanted to speak.
Oh, Duncan wants to come in. Good. I couldn't see. I can't see who's waving. Duncan, come on in.
Yeah, these questions are very pertinent. I think the first thing to say is that the question has very different answers depending on where you are in the UK. So I'll give you a specific example. In Wales, we stopped the proposals for an M4 extension around Newport and Cardiff on sustainability grounds. Meanwhile, the Westminster government is now proposing that is reversed and that investment it won't happen, but they're saying it, investment in rebuilding that motorway. So there's a direct clash between the Welsh government's more focus on well-being and the Westminster government's absolute lack of interest in it. So in Wales, we have not only to lobby and work to get these sorts of things implemented, but we also have to try to protect our autonomy against an encroaching Westminster to act in our own interests. But as I said, it's implementing these things is enormously difficult. It's staggeringly difficult, and this writing the report just kind of makes that even more obvious, just how far we've got to go. And I think the answer is there's only one answer, and that is we have to organise. We have to organise, and we have to become powerful. There's no other way of achieving these sorts of changes. So, and that's what we're setting out to do, certainly in Wales, is to organise these lobbies together, to come together. We're not together at the moment. We need to come together and we need to become powerful and start influencing change.
Do any of the other panelists want to come in on this vital question of political leverage, changing the political climate?
Yes, please, Polly. Can I just very quickly say that I completely echo what Duncan and Diane have said here and their points, but I was thinking representation matters as well. You know, who is in the decision room makes an enormous difference to what kind of policies and programs are passed. And we saw that very much, of course, through the austerity policies that were passed by this government, where not only were there not enough women in the decision-making room in government to ensure that the Chancellor carried out equality impact assessments, but women's lives, the lived reality of women's lives, were not taken into account. So what we had was an outcome with austerity policies, where austerity policies disproportionately affected women more than men, but also Black women more than any other group. And that matters. It matters who is in the room. So that's one place where we can also start by changing representation so that it's meaningful. It's not just about you know, how it looks, but it's also about meaningful representation at the top so that we can carry out meaningful equality impact assessments.
Thank you. Any of the others want to come in on this?
Yes, I think Angela and Diane have, and Lynn as well, everyone.
Okay, everybody, let's hear from everybody. It's the crucial question.
And if I can jump in, we were asked as well about implementing in Scotland and from a Scottish perspective, but I think, and across the devolved nations, but I think what we're trying to, for me, what needs to happen here is we need to move from sentimentalising care to politicising care. It is a political issue. It is an issue that requires political action, and it requires, as Duncan and others have said, political activism. And our report, I think, gives evidence to, and you know, we've called it a call for action. The political rhetoric at the moment is very warm towards care, but we need political action there, and we need political action that commits real finance, real money to investing in care, and to the difficult conversations on tax that apparently nobody wants to have, yet our polling says people do want to see their taxes directed to services that improve the care and well-being of all. So there is a political imperative on politicians in Scotland seeking re-election in 2021 and elsewhere, a political imperative to act on those expressed wishes of the public, which is to invest in care and well-being. And in Scotland, we've seen both opportunities and how quickly warm words and commitments to gender equality can evaporate. Scotland has got a very good track record on rhetoric. We have a fairly strong record in some aspects of hard gender equality policy. But when it comes to the advisory group on economic recovery, care was barely dispensed with in a paragraph, despite the opportunities there to tie in the Scottish National Investment Bank, the Infrastructure Investment Commission, all of these missed opportunities, which now in the responses the Scottish Government is starting to think about. But we can see how quickly the warm words can evaporate. And the evidence in the report and the weighty and anchoring policy briefings that have informed the recommendations all provide substance and weight to reinforce that what Lynn has said, that investing in care is not a soft option. It makes economic sense, and it is an economic and political imperative.
Thank you.
Could I possibly maybe just jump in? Just on the back of that, I think this, much of this is about also changing the narrative, and we have we have Build Back Better at the moment, and we have the hard hats out there. But our lexicon, things have changed over the past 10 years. And somebody mentioned earlier, 20 years ago, we didn't hear of austerity. 4 years ago, we hadn't heard of fake news, and it's just permeated our language. And even the way governments have changed the language in terms of well-being. And I think we can change the language of government and the language of the economy to care. And it's not soft, it's hard. And so the more that we speak of this, and the more that we challenge, and the more that we all talk about it all of the time, I think that then enters our language, and that's how we change things. And the other part is that what COVID really showed is we have this report, and like there's nothing really good about COVID, but one of the things that came through very clearly at the beginning was when the schools closed, the economy closes, because we don't have care and we don't have childcare. And so everybody actually knows that for a fact. So we have that, and we have the report, and it's time to change it's time to change the language.
Thank you very much.
Diane, do you want to say something?
Oh, well, I hope we'll have time for more questions, but I'll just add a couple of things. Picking up Lynn's point on changing the narrative, I think we certainly hope to do that. And I think the time is right. There's a report just out from the OECD saying that it's time for rich countries in the OECD to change the narrative, to move away from a narrow focus on maximizing economic growth and worrying about their budget deficits and their debt to GDP ratios, to a much broader narrative that encourages journalists, for instance, not just to report what's the latest figures on the GDP, but to report a much wider range of indicators on well-being and sustainability and equality. So I hope we are part of a groundswell of opinion that says we have to change the narrative, as Lynn has just said. I do think there's a possibility of doing that. But as well as the narrative, we do need the numbers. And I was thinking of the question we got from Regina in Berlin, but also to point out that on the chat box, Ursula Manaran, who's a feminist economist in London, has posted a link to a piece of research that she and her team have done, which has got numbers as well. So I think we have the narrative, changing the narrative and providing new numbers, and making these alliances that people have talked about. So I think we very strategically thought about the kind of alliances we wanted to make, not to pose this as a kind of, this is just of interest to women who want to break the glass ceiling, for instance. But this is a report which a caring economy is for a better life for all of us.
I think that's a very good point, that it is about the great step forward in this report is that it's not just about giving women a leg up. It is about the whole of the economy and the whole of the way all of us live. And I very much liked the whole point about, you know, when schools close, everything closes. When nurseries close, everything closes. So many jobs shut down, or people had to leave their jobs because of the lack of care. And it made your report, although it was commissioned long before we thought of the pandemic, absolutely as timely as could possibly be. It has sort of speeded it on its way, I think. Hannah, have we got any more questions?
I think we've got time for a couple of more. We've had a lot of questions. MH asks, thank you for the report. Could you say a bit more about how Social Security could promote women's autonomy, especially as means-tested benefits don't do this, and what next steps you might be taking to develop ideas for a radical Social Security system? An anonymous attendee asks, we know that the lack of social and childcare provision means that women have to step in to fill the gaps unpaid. How can we secure investment in provision while governments and other institutions know that they can rely on this and simply ignore the consequences? And Kai Green asks, thank you for this wonderful report. I would love to hear about what the panel think about the private sector involvement in this. Can we find a way to incentivize caring values into businesses so that the responsibility doesn't fall entirely on the public and third sectors? As social enterprises show, businesses do not have to be the enemy and have great potential to promote care.
Thank you. Marion, would you like to come in on this? I think that last point is interesting because we haven't talked about the private sector at all. We've assumed this is totally a matter of transfer from taxes to public services. Where does the private sector come into this? How can we engage them? How can we make them be demanding this as well for what they need for their own, for the sake of their own well-being and their own economic success?
Thank you, Polly. Yeah, this is a really crucial point, and we were really lucky to have on the commission Eugenia Migliori from the CBI, and she really brought a lot of insights from the business perspective onto the commission. And it was very important for us that the commission did have this makeup spanning, trade unions, academia, business, civil society, campaigners, journalists, and so on. And that was really insightful. And I think, in my initial presentation, I pointed to Aviva as an example of a large company who is doing, who's making strides, particularly around the area of equal parental leave. And I think there are a lot of businesses in different forms. We can look at social enterprises, we can look at cooperatives, and we kind of draw on different examples throughout the report of different types of businesses who are doing things differently and where we can learn from them. I think another kind of crucial point that we make in the report is about paying taxes and making that companies and businesses pay their fair share of tax. And that is the kind of most concrete way I think that companies can demonstrate their corporate social responsibility obligations, and making sure that is really a priority. And then I think we can look to alternative business models, as I say, kind of looking at enterprises. If we look at the example of Infinity Foods, a food co-op in Brighton, as a way of which businesses can really have a positive impact in their community. So I think there's a lot of ways that businesses can contribute to this, and I think it's really important that this, we call the report a call to action, and it has to be a call to action to everybody, to different sectors of society. This isn't going to happen just with one small, part of society on board. It has to be across the board, and I think there's already a lot going on in the business world that we can learn from.
Do any of the others of you want to come in on these last group of questions? I think quite interesting, the question about social security. I mean, this has been about care more than it's been about particularly money in the pockets. It's been about care in the community. To what extent would, some people have been saying recently, increasing social security also has very strong good economic effects? So if any of you want to come in on that.
Shall I start? And I'm sure that some of the others also want to contribute. I think the first thing we wanted to say, we recognise our social security system at the moment is not a caring system. It's become a punitive system. It's become a system which doesn't provide the security that people need. And we've seen that as more and more people have been thrown onto universal credit during the pandemic. So it's not a system that's a caring system. It started out as a caring system when it was created in its current form after the Second World War, but it's really deteriorated and it isn't. So we want one that's based on dignity and autonomy. And on my visits to Scotland, I've seen that in Scotland, there's been a lot of discussion about reframing the social security system so that it is based on dignity and it's based on rights. And I think that's the first step, so reframing the whole system. Then you have got specific proposals. We wanted to enhance autonomy by enabling individuals to establish their own claims to benefits, rather than at the moment with universal credit, where it's household together has to claim the benefit. Lots of criticisms of that from many women. We wanted to improve and extend non-means tested benefits as far as possible and make them really reflect the costs of living, caring for children, of living with disabilities. And we've been very cognizant of the kind of arguments that people in the disability rights community have made about the kind of flexibility that they want, but also their concerns about whether systems like universal basic income will adequately take note of the different needs that people have. We of course want to see the current set of benefits completely reformed, and the value. We would join all those people who are saying it's no point just lifting up the value of benefits during the duration of the crisis and ending that in March. This has got to continue into the future, but it also got to be much more root and branch reform of the social security system. There are a lot of ideas around that at the moment, which we will, I think, and the Women's Budget Group will engage with in the future.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I'm very glad we have joining with us Dr. Shola Mos-Shobamimu, who is a commissioner as well, and she's a solicitor in New York and in England and Wales, author, commentator, founder of Women in Leadership. We're very glad you could join us, Shola. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you for having me. I'm absolutely chuffed to be with all of you today. Look, when I look at the Women's Budget Group report, this commissioner's report, three words come to mind. I see the word transformative, I see positive disruption, and I see barrier breaking. And the reason for this is because when you take the wholesome view of what this report has been able to shed, what it's basically provided is an E2E, an end-to-end solution in providing an economy that is truly caring. And the word caring is not some soft word that people should feel, oh, it doesn't feel strong enough. It's absolutely strong enough, because end-to-end means that it addresses the food on your table, the clothes on your back, and the roof over your heads. It means that when you think of the words gender equality, sustainability, and well-being, these are not slogans. These are the things we have to deal with on a daily basis. They're facts of life. They are critical and pivotal to a progressive economy. You can't have an economy that the 21st century needs without addressing these things, but addressing the issues of well-being and sustainability and gender equality. We all know gender equality is absolutely critical. We know how there is no value placed on unpaid work, placed on the invincible social and physical infrastructure in our country. That has to change. The way we look at economy has to change. The way we define or redefine our contributions to the economy has to change, because we are not all the same. So our contributions cannot all look the same. And so, as I mentioned earlier, when we think about how we should address the economy, particularly centering those who are marginalized in our country, you know, from Black, Asian, and ethnic minority groups to women, to people with disabilities and other protected groups, we must understand that each of these groups are vital to a progressive economy. And we are losing out by not ensuring that wholesomeness, in not ensuring that we are actually tapping into the fullness of our human resources. You know, is it a call to action? You bet your bottom dollar, yes, it is a call to action. It's a call to action to the government on how it prioritizes and delivers its policies. It's a call to action to every single one of us to bring our expertise to the table. Listen, the Women's Budget Group is an incredible collective of experts, people with different backgrounds coming together to address an issue. But that's you too. Even if you're not officially a member, I would say it's a call to action to join the Women's Budget Group already and bring your own expertise to the table, right? That's the only way we can have progressive solutions that are sustainable. So caring is all around, it's wholesome. You and I know that the economy is not about how much money goes into your pocket. The economy should not only address what you do with your 9-to-5 or your part-time job, because you exist before and after that 9-to-5 and before and after your part-time. Worry about those times. Worry about what you're doing that actually makes that real progression for the for the country. That needs to be recognized too. And the less time we spend talking about it and raising it as, look, I am a contributor. I'm a contributor in my society this way. If we don't spend enough time talking about it and highlighting it, we're not part of the solution. And we need to, if we start thinking about how we redefine the economy and we define what our contributions are to the economy, then people have to wake up and listen. Look, 2020, I'm sure many of you would agree with me, has been a serious kick up the backside. I'm like, what the heck is going on? From January to now, I mean, it's affected every single thing, right? And what 2020 has done is forced us to think outside the box And that is what this Women's Budget Group report has done. It's thinking outside the box. And for the politicians that will be lobbied and will have to look at this, and the media, I mean, the Women's Budget Group have even gone as far as producing 8 steps. I mean, the solution is there. This is all you need to do, right? The work has been done. You just need to go and implement it. So I would say to you, as an individual, as a contributor to this society, it is your chance to digest what this report says, right? Then bring it out in a way that speaks to you, and then head off to your MP and make a difference. Head off to your business, whether you own it or you're an employee, and make a difference. Make them take notice. There is power in our collective voices and in our individual voices, but it starts with each and every single one of us. So it doesn't matter what marginalized group you're part of, bring your expertise to the table. And if you find a gap somewhere, you know what? That is not a crisis. That's an opportunity. Where you see the gap, step in and fill it up already. But I'm going to stop preaching right now. I think the report does a great job, and it's wonderful to be part of all of these commissions. And I think the Women's Budget Group have done an incredible job in coordinating this. So please, women, we stand united in solidarity always. And even when there are differences, it brings us together, not separates us. Okay? All right, that's me done.
Shola, thank you so much. Exactly what's needed. A sense of a call to action, which is what this document is. This is a launch and not an ending. So thank you very much to all of you out there who have joined us and who've engaged with the work of the Commission. As Shola says, it needs to be taken out there now to every place where people can be helped to understand why care is at the heart of an economic success and an economic future step forward. The Women's Budget Group is going to be doing further webinars over the next few weeks and months, delving deeper into particular topics that this report covers. So do watch out for those. And please do share the report as far and wide as you can. Remember to tweet #CaringEconomyNow and #WBGCommission, and sign up to the WBG newsletter, which you can do on the WBG website. So thank you all so much. I feel greatly inspired by this. I feel newly energized. I always knew that care really mattered. I've written about care all of my life, but always with the slight sinking of the heart of, well, this is only going to touch those people whose lives are personally affected by it. What this report does is to take it a whole step further. No, it's not about the few people who need help or the many people who need help. It's about the shape of the economy itself and about the way we all live, women and men too. It's not just about women. Women are pushing it forward. But this is of great benefit to men as well. Less of the hard hats, more of the care. Thank you all very much indeed.